Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I will walk you through Frederick William Farrar's amazing book History of Interpretation. Coming up next on The Curious.
Early history of interpretation. Although interpreting became more prevalent in the post-war period with the creation of simultaneous interpreting to solve communication problems during the Nuremberg trials, interpreting has truly existed since ancient Egypt. There are also records of consecutive interpreters in ancient Greece and the Roman Empire, and the work of interpreters has not changed much throughout the centuries, even during the Middle Ages and the Age of Discovery. This situation continued until the Paris Peace Conferences in 1919, when politicians began to speak in languages other than French, the official language of diplomacy. This paved the way for multilingualism. The growing prominence of good business relations meant that gestures were no longer adequate, and so the interpreters made their first appearance. The first records of interpreting date back to the 3rd millennium BC, in the form of an Egyptian low-relief in a prince's tomb that alludes to an interpreter supervisor. Further sources from ancient Egypt indicate that the activity was mainly connected to public administration. However, other ancient civilizations, for example, ancient Greece and the Roman Empire, have documented the existence of interpreters linked to other fields: administration, commerce, religion, and the army. Interpreters continued to be employed throughout the Middle Ages in monasteries, where there were monks of many different nationalities, in councils, accompanying preachers in foreign lands, in synagogues, translating the Torah out loud, as well as in business expeditions, military incursions, and diplomatic assemblies. The only thing that actually changed during the Age of Discovery was the use of new and different languages. During his first voyage, Christopher Columbus noticed that his Arabic and Hebrew-speaking interpreter was not very useful in communicating with the Indians. Accordingly, after this voyage, Columbus decided to capture some Native Americans and teach them Spanish so they could help him as interpreters on his next expedition. The same happened with the Spanish that were held captive by the natives. They learned the language and culture and later served as interpreters. In Europe, the French language had replaced Italian as the language of diplomacy and the elite, which reduced the need for interpreters. This situation continued until the Paris Peace Conferences in 1919, when negotiators, mostly politicians, began to reject the supremacy of the French language in favor of their own languages.
Nuremberg trials. Interpreting gradually evolved into an honorable profession, but for the most part it remained unchanged until the mid-20th century. Then in 1934 the game entirely changed, when an interpreter managed to render into French over the radio an important speech given in Nuremberg. Listeners in France were astounded to hear the message in their language just as the words were being pronounced in German. The interpreter was André Kamenker, the speaker, Adolf Hitler. Simultaneous interpreting had been invented. A decade later the technique was perfected, again in Nuremberg, helping bring closure to the irrational war that Hitler had started. 21 Nazi officials, accused of a variety of offenses and atrocities, were prosecuted in what would go down in history as the first war crimes trial of modern times. As judges, prosecutors, and counselors prepared for the historic Nuremberg trial, a major practical problem arose. Every testimony and every piece of evidence brought before the court would have to be translated from its original language into another three, depending on consecutive interpretation. The traditional oral translation technique, in which speakers and interpreters take turns, would prove tedious. A new system had to be attempted. At that time, the IBM company had been experimenting with a simultaneous telephonic system and offered its equipment to be pilot tested at no cost, thereby resolving the hardware issue. The challenge of making the system work, with instantaneous translations from and into German, English, French, and Russian done by interpreters and trained in the new technique, fell to Leon Dostert, formerly a personal interpreter to General Eisenhower. The interpreters recruited were divided into 3 groups of 12 and relieved one another every 45 minutes. To compensate for the overwhelming mental and psychological strain, assigned interpreters were offered 1 day off for every 2 days of work. Previous attempts of interpreting speech in real time had been made, with fluctuating degrees of success, But Nuremberg is where the craft was systematized and perfected. The new technique, a lot more prompt and proficient, rapidly gained favor in diplomatic circles, with consecutive interpretation gradually replaced as the dominant technique. Interpreting booths slowly found their way into the conference halls of major intergovernmental organizations like the UN, UNESCO, and the European Commission. Nonetheless, a new and paradigmatic change would soon take the world of interpreting by storm. The development of high-level contact between nations and the creation of large international organizations led to the birth of a new form of interpreting: simultaneous interpreting. Consecutive interpreting meant that the time spent in negotiations had to be multiplied by the number of languages that each statement had to be translated into, which was a very time-consuming process. Notwithstanding this initial reticence, the practice of simultaneous interpreting developed and began to be used in some international conferences. Nevertheless, it was with the Nuremberg trials that simultaneous interpreting was finally accepted, as it was important that such a politically urgent process not last longer than public sentiment could tolerate. From then on, simultaneous interpreting became essential not only for big international institutions like the UN or EU, but also in the worlds of business and culture, where people increasingly use this mode of interpreting.
The impact of COVID-19. Apart from our book review in question, we are curious about the major transformation that took place in 2020 and its salient impact on the profession of simultaneous interpretation. Except for a few minor technical and cosmetic improvements on microphones and interpreters' consoles, the equipment and techniques involved in delivering simultaneous interpretation hadn't changed for 75 years since Nuremberg. Then coronavirus pandemic hit. Literally overnight it was no longer safe for interpreters, or delegates, for that matter, to attend meetings in person. The prevalent risk of a deadly infection imposed new social distancing and preventive measures. Leading the world into lockdown, meetings were pushed online. Supporting a multilingual meeting now implied finding a way for interpretation to be provided remotely, a gigantic disruption, indeed, and once again, one made possible by a new technology and widespread internet connectivity. A number of remote simultaneous interpreting platforms emerged either before or at the backdrop of COVID-19, such as Kudo, Interprefy, Interactio, Ablio, and Zoom.
Let's have a quick review of Kudo. Kudo, founded just 3 years before the pandemic, had been developing a new system for the delivery of interpreting from servers in the cloud, rather than a physical booth. Backed by industry-leading technology advocates and a world-class conference interpreter, Kudo was ready to support this earth-shattering transformation and aid businesses and organizations to keep their busy schedule of meetings in multiple languages. Kudo is proud to have supported interpreters worldwide whose livelihood would have otherwise been seriously compromised. Kudo now counts on 12,000 Kudo certified interpreters and hundreds of Kudo Pro interpreters who continue to impress the world with their incredible talent through the Kudo platform. For more information on Kudo, you can visit https://kudoway.com/.
Thanks for watching. The Amazon link for this unputdownable book is as usual in the description box. Give this video a thumbs up if you want to see more videos from this channel. If you know of a useful book that could benefit others, let me know in the comments below, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button and notification icon for more useful books and other related stuff from the curious.